Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Hey, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to see y'all. Um, I usually get this meeting started in about 5 minutes, just to give folks time to come on and have a rich discussion. So looking forward to it. Hi, Norm. Welcome.
I had a half hour before my next meeting. Figured I'd pop in for the start of the show.
Great. Well, I usually get started about 12:35 my time, so
Yeah,
give it a few minutes.
makes sense.
Cool. Hi, folks. For anyone who just joined, know that we'll get started here in about 3 more minutes to give people time to come on. Okay, so let's get started. For those of you who are new to the meeting, I usually have a couple set of slides just to help take us through a discussion of the topic, which is today is research support. And then I take notes right in this presentation, and then I end up posting the recording and pointers to the notes on our YouTube channel and connect those back to our Torus community website page. So today's topic again is research support. So glad to have you all here, and hope it'll be a good discussion. Some things to help prompt the discussion, or some key points that I put here that when I think of research support, some of the things I think of are, a workflow, meaning like how you conduct the research. Are there tools that are needed for that? In this case, for research, is there, audience segmentation? We could talk about activities and question types, crowdsourcing and learner sourcing, which a lot of that is going on lately. And then, of course, data collection analysis, any tools or data integrations that might be needed. And then we can always talk about survey capabilities, which are also usually part of research courses. So some questions to help guide the discussion are, so we can start anywhere anybody would like to, but what types of research projects are you conducting in OLI, or what would you like to be able to conduct? What is your current workflow for doing these sorts of things? Again, tools for audience segmentation, even thinking about how do we support teachers who are delivering the courses that are being used in experiments and research. Are there external tools that we could model? Are there external tools that would be nice to be integrated with OLI to help with research? And again, and always, what reports and dashboards and types of analytics do you need to help drive research? So we can start with any of these. I just kind of throw these questions out there to get your mind thinking in this direction. But please, anyone speak up and let me know what kinds of experiments, let's start there. What kinds of experiments do you usually conduct using OLI or just courses in general?
Erin, would it be worthwhile to note some places where we have attempted to do or even doing research in the legacy system, which the legacy system's current limitations make incredibly painful or impossible?
Yeah, sure. We can start anywhere. I mean, that's what I kind of meant by workflow too. Like, what kind of workflows do you use so that we can identify the areas that need improvement from legacy? But yeah, any of that is up for grabs.
I think there are two related issues here. The ability to designate certain activities as being pre-tests or post-tests. So being able to conduct those knowledge assessments, both with appropriate controls for the ways that we would expect these kinds of activities to behave, because often we end up doing some sort of gross workarounds. And then the ability to pull the data back out of these assessments in ways that make it pretty immediately useful to researchers. And that in turn speaks to some needs for greater flexibility and speed in data access and reporting. I think that anything that is on, anytime anyone is trying to order off menu for data, it ends up being an awful lot of back and forth. And did you get this? And researchers being like, well, I can try to make that work. I think that we need to figure out ways to both make the menu more expansive, but also to make ordering off menu a little less painful, and hopefully require fewer cycles of everyone involved.
Yeah, those are definitely places. The pre and post tests. I know that Lauren, you're on. I'm always kind of picking on you because you do a lot of this work. And I know we've done some specialized reports for you. But in terms of pre and post tests, is there anything else that you would like to see us put in place?
Yeah, so I am not in charge of doing like either the big data dump request or the survey request, because we talked about how the results of our surveys, which are pre and post tests for us. They serve as pre and post tests because the surveys themselves are Likert scale data, so they can be pre and post. I know that we have to get that file like separately, which is something that we talked about before, how it's not part of the current like data pull package.
Mhm.
My understanding is that basically Kathy and Victor sort of pre-process, post-process, do everything with processing of that data. So I have no idea how it's set up when it comes out of the system, like what the beginning point is before they get it ready to analyze an SPSS. One thing that we had talked about was I love the idea of being able to make sure that any columns are labeled appropriately, like being able to determine, like I think that's maybe sort of the off menu, that might be part of the off menu request that the last speaker spoke about. It's really helpful to be able to like basically label your data before it's even generated. So that when you get a report, especially a data dump that has thousands and thousands of columns, you know exactly what you're identifying. So in some ways, it's probably helpful for us that that pre-post survey is separate, as opposed to being part of the full data dump, which includes all those different timestamps. I also would like, I think it would be really helpful to have the times to be able to tailor some of that timestamp data, because we're very interested in how long students spend in different modules and how long they're spending in the toolbox as a whole. So it would be really helpful to be able to generate some columns that might be compositions of multiple timestamp data. So if you say I have 7 modules, but it's not that I want the start time and the end time of everything, it's like I want to know how much time they spent in these locations and then add those up. Be nice to basically make your own columns in advance for that timestamp data to try to determine how long people are spending in different locations of your course. Maybe that's something that only we're interested in, but maybe it's for other people too. That can help with completion-based sort of work.
No, I think that would be definitely helpful to everybody, because I think it's something that a lot of folks do. You know, they take that timestamp data and they have to perform, you know, additional calculations to figure out exactly what they're getting at. And if they could identify that prior to getting the data, that would be cool.
It allows for a lot of cutoffs, I think, with the data, because then you can say, I'm eliminating, you know, students from this data set that spent less than 5 minutes on this module. That could be really helpful and save a lot of time, as opposed to having to do a whole bunch of timestamp data calculations like post the data dump.
Right.
And many of us would want to eliminate students that didn't spend any time and just clicked through like that.
Right, right. Yeah, timestamps are important, and ways to manipulate those, I think are also something others would want for sure.
Lauren, I'm just curious, do you have models for systems that give you that kind of flexibility and ability to specify well, or is nobody really doing a good job of this that we're seeing?
That's a great question. I have no idea if anybody has already figured out the algorithms to manipulate the timestamp data in that way. And I think we would probably have to do a fair bit of digging to try to investigate that. So I wish I had an existing model in mind. I think that probably it should be, oh, I see, Duolingo public data. Maybe that might be true actually, because they must try to model how long people are spending in their different language modules. That's a good idea. That was a good suggestion in the chat. Look at.
Thanks, Caitlin. I'm gonna add those to the notes. Good question, Norm.
Oh. I'm never above looking at other people's good work and stealing it rather than recreating it. So.
Right. Oh, I mean, that's one of the questions. Yeah, if people are using other models that they like, that they'd like to maybe either integrate with or copy. That's always, yeah, a good starting point too, with no need to recreate the wheel if it exists already.
Mark, looks like you just jumped on camera. Did you want to
Yeah.
dive in?
When I was working with people like Naoko and some of our PhD students writing outside of OLI research instruments, we were collecting not only the timestamp data, but the calculated durations for a lot of the questions, because they were determining how long it took a response time. For, so I do have instruments do that, but they don't fit into OLI yet.
So what do you do, Mark? You pull that data out into some other application or tool? Or you
No,
just
actually, I do the calculation as it's the information was collected within the application and um, exported out as a spreadsheet
Mhm.
with the calculations already pre-done within the application. So, for example, in Noko's case, she was figuring out how long response time would be to a stimulus, or AURO, oral stimulus, and the response and whether the response was accurate. And she was comparing the accuracy versus the response time. And one of the columns in the resulting database was the not only the actual times, but the calculated time and the accuracy.
And accuracy being correctness or incorrectness.
All right.
I also think that my understanding is that, but having not seen it myself, that the amount of data that comes out during a data dump is just like can be maybe really overwhelming. So it could be helpful to have some sort of a box click system where you could basically say like, all I want is I want the results of the checkpoint quizzes, and then to kind of like pull that out and deal with the checkpoint quiz data from your data set. And then you could say, okay, I now feel emotionally prepared enough to download the timestamp data. Because as I said, I would only be using the timestamp data as a filter system for who to include or not include in the data. So I would use that as my like exclusion parameter, filtering out students who didn't try or care. So a lot of people would use it for that purpose. So I think it might be almost nice to download the data set like in little bins. And then it's more manageable. The way that you look at the way that you kind of work in Excel is like that, right? You're like, okay, well, I'm looking at the survey data from this course. Okay, I'm merging it. You kind of build up data. Whereas the way the data dump is, you're like almost like, I would imagine you're deleting a lot of things. You're like trying to build down the data, which is not how I analyze things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking pie in the sky, right? Having an interface where you can say, okay, I don't want to just do the whole raw data download. This is the data that I want. And I wonder, like, so interesting. So you'd want to segment out, just to riff on that a little bit, you would want to segment out, checkpoint data, probably, formative activity data separately. What are some other separate types of data you'd want to get besides
our survey data?
Oh yeah, your survey data.
Yeah, absolutely. So That's absolutely what I would do. So I think that the first thing that I might do is I might do that horrible filtration step. So I would like go through and be like, what students am I even going to include or not include? I might start with that if I was feeling really ambitious, based on timestamps. And then I would look at their checkpoint data, and I would probably evaluate that checkpoint data in accordance with my pre-post test.
Mhm.
And then I'd evaluate that checkpoint data with the course grades, because that's data that I have access to from the course. So there's also like all this data that's generated from the courses that we work in separately from this. So there's a lot of like comparison that goes on. So this is also one data set of many. Like this is only a piece of the data.
Mhm. Okay. Anyone else have anything more to say about like data segmentation and
I think we're eventually going to need to make some decisions on how much of our data support lives in and is a part of Torus versus how much should actually be built out as a series of workflow components for LearnSphere. Just how much is the data toolkit or the data workbench integrated but separate. But yeah, this question of how what we're comparing and how we're segmenting, even things down to timestamp level, leads me to think about and maybe talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're thinking about research in the Torus platform. One of the things that we're working very hard on right now, combination of support from the Schmidt Foundation, Schmidt Futures, and an NSF award, are integrating tools that will allow to deploy A/B tests and adaptive experiments inside of OLI. And we're doing that currently by looking at existing platforms, upgrade in combination with a tool that we're developing called Easy for NSF. So we end up imagining a place where much of the experimental command structure for this style of experiment will be integrated, but will still likely live just beside Torus rather than being embedded directly in Torus. But that leads me to wonder, for the kinds of research that Lauren's describing, that doesn't easily fit, or I should say that doesn't currently fit in this notion that most of our experimental command structure is focused on things like A/B studies. And I'm wondering whether there's additional, can we keep a vision of a unified experimental control center that can encompass the kind of work that Mark's talking about, the kind of work that Lauren's talking about, and the stuff that we're actively playing with now? Or do we need more than one command center, and do we need to be a little more thoughtful about the kinds of research that we're enabling? The other half of that, for me, and one of the other places that we really wanted to further our research is in our research capabilities, have been in areas of some combination of learning analytics, and sometimes even adaptivity, right? So the legacy system has a really narrow vision of how we build a learning dashboard. What does it look like, and what is the set of algorithms that powers it? And we've left space in our architecture for, no, we need to have multiple engines, multiple algorithms, potentially multiple displays. Although we haven't built those out yet, the system can support those. But that ends up leading us to yet another place, yet another area of research, right? What are the algorithms that we have that are best at estimating knowledge state, and how do we understand differences between UI and things? So I guess in some ways that was just intended to sort of share some of the things that we are doing and some of the ways that we're thinking about research, and bounce that out for larger discussion.
I really found what you said to be helpful, because I think that you're right that people are using the data in very different ways. Like everything that I've described is, I want to be able to manage what appears in my data set that's exported, because I want to export the data set and understand what the column headers are, because I'm exporting this ultimately to analyze in SPSS alongside other data sets. There's going to be data integration that's happening in a completely different platform. So I'm trying to just extract the data in a way that's easy and meaningful for me. But what you're describing is also, well, is there a way for me to interact with the data and do other things within the learning sphere, which is a completely different question. And I think people will use the data in different ways, and different researchers are just comfortable doing different things. So those are very discrete uses. And so I'm glad you brought.
Thanks. Yeah, well, and similarly, I think that you describing your use cases help crystallize for me. Like, oh yeah, we need to really start to think about and accommodate these different approaches to research in the system. Michael, I know that you and your team did some nice user research and investigations on paths for research support, and although that focused on A/B testing, I assume it unearthed some other interesting gems and stones. Any comments on that?
No, I think, look, a lot of the research, I would defer to the Upgrade folks. What we found was they've done a lot of deep thinking about this, and it would, I suggest getting one of them on this call directly, because I think we ended up essentially deferring to their fairly comprehensive work in researching use cases, and confined ourselves to looking at integration and implementation.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how labeling will work in the A/B testing, because obviously we are very interested in doing the A/B testing, and we would be very pleased to roll out just two different, subtly different versions of the toolbox, where the difference between groups A and B is explicit and intentional. And then, yeah, I mean, how do we know when we're downloading the data? So this is, again, from the perspective of someone that knows that my research team is going to be just parsing this data to use in SPSS. So how is that going to work? Who gets assigned A, B? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Upgrade interface allows you to define, basically there would be a feed from Torus to Upgrade, and you have a number of options about random assignment, assignments that you select. Obviously, there's opt out. There's I opted in, but now I opt out later. And Upgrade is going to track those and label those for you automatically. And there are a number of options as well about within course, between courses, that sort of other experimental structures besides A/B testing. So it's really quite nice once Upgrade understands the structure of your experiment. It will implement a lot of the logic, and it will label for you in a format that's exportable. And we're talking with them about XAPI at the moment. That seems to be the direction that we're all moving.
So I think the part of what we're looking at with that kind of infrastructure is to understand the degree of the granularity of differences that we can support, right? So, do we want to be doing A/B testing down at the level of feedback on an individual question? Probably. Do we want to be able to swap out different kinds of activities? Do we want to be able to swap out entire pages, maybe even entire modules? And so, we sort of walk into this with a set of preconceived notions on what constitutes a course package and what constitutes a section. And from that point, how do we want to assign students to conditions, but Upgrade at least has seemed to play nicely with that so far. And we just keep reminding ourselves of what our own biases are and make sure that we're not getting too blinded by them.
Yeah, it would be helpful to hear from folks, not now, well, it could be now or later, either way, about their level of granularity that they're working on. Are you working on the single question, on the assessment type, on the page, on the module level, when you're testing conditions? We have mechanisms for doing all different levels of granularity. They're not, unfortunately, the same mechanism at this point in the platform's maturity. We're going to have to recruit several different mechanisms until we have enough resources to tie them all together under one. And so it would be helpful for prioritization purposes, to hear about that.
The way I think we would do it is we would just have two different versions of a particular module. Group A would get one version and Group B would be the other. They would be labeled identically so that if students happened to be comparing notes, they wouldn't notice that somebody had a different module. So I also know we would be very, I'm sure we would prioritize like simplification, especially for us. So we would just have basically two different versions of a module embedded in the same sort of course package. And then we would want it to be randomized which students got which one. And then we would be looking for, would either be differences probably in the checkpoint quizzes or something like that. But what would be easiest for us is probably not to be selecting individual elements that would be similar or different. We would want to keep it as simple as possible from our perspective to make sure that we didn't make any mistakes also when designing the A and the B.
Okay, so simple as possible for you is at the module level.
I think what we would do is we would have the module be fundamentally different in the two groups. And I'm guessing that either that would be, we would provide additional material in one module as opposed to another, or we would be providing basically a different type of activity in one module versus the other. And we would be looking at checkpoint quiz results probably primarily over the formative pieces. I think we kind of prioritize the checkpoint quiz data, if that helps. And we would probably also have a pre-post survey with Likert scale. So those would be the two elements that we would look at for comparison between the different groups, as well as other data that we have access to, like course level data. So checkpoint quizzes, pre and post, Likert scale, survey questions.
Okay.
I know that it's a little different with some experiments that are going on, and I know folks here are interested in talking about learner sourcing and crowdsourcing of different parts of courses. And that leads me to think that the level of granularity there would be groups of questions. But you know, I don't, yeah. So anybody want to speak up about that a little bit?
So we have tried some different kind of approaches in trying to analyze OLI data. And generally, I have not been that involved directly, but I have been in talk with Ken and other graduate level students who help me analyze some of the data, and then they also write research paper on it. So some of the things there are two parts to this. One part is that some of the thing we learned in e-learning courses that instead of pre-post quiz questions or exams that Ken was holding, formative assessment was the thing that was helping us student improve their project most. Like these things were directly correlated. And so it took long time to do these kind of analysis. And we had some hypothesis that maybe quiz question had these specific problems compared to formative. Maybe we put less effort into it, so we tried improving it. But because the entire process took a long time, that after the course we have to request data sub experts separately. We have not done that analysis again. So just doing those kind of things on an ongoing basis, like entire process from start to end, we have already done it. We have these Python scripts and model, and we have analyzed different kind of things. If we can just make the timeline shorter, that will help us improve the courses much faster. And for the crowdsourcing thing, similarly, we in one of the courses, generally student rating have been really low compared to 8 other courses that we have been in metals. So for that specific course, we have OLI modules, and we try to implement a lot of open-ended question just to get a lot of learner sourcing from them. And now we have all this data dump, and I am looking at it this semester so I can improve the course for next semester. And it has been taking a lot of time just to look at student responses in different places and then trying to correlate it with manually just to see whether it is affecting the quiz score, whether it is improving their project quality, whether did they bring this up somewhere in discussion, so that we realize that maybe this kind of point was addressed. Like there are a lot of things, but it's hard to look at it together. So I'm interested in that kind of making it easy for analyzing the learner sourcing data.
What kind of questions, open-ended questions are you asking students over here?
So one category of questions is guided discovery, that we will ask them something before they actually watch a video or read the slide or do multiple choice question related to it. One sort of question is them trying to apply something that they have learned. Can you think of an application that you have seen of that particular learning theory? Because we are actually teaching about learning. So we are asking, have you seen this kind of learning theory? Yeah, I can look into it more if this would help, that what kind of question we asked.
Yeah, we can definitely touch base on this because we have been doing some analysis on student-generated multiple choice questions, and we've been running like some GPT algorithms to and NLP algorithms to like just go through the data, open-ended responses, and analyze the data. So yeah, let's connect and probably see if there are some overlaps and if we can use some of the scripts that we have for the data that you have.
Okay, I'll talk to you after meeting.
Yeah, Tanvi's been working with Stephen Moore on learner sourcing for a while now. And so I'm sure they have some tips and tricks, but yeah, Tanvi, make sure that you're keeping a list of things that you want to improve as you're going through this process. And it would be really cool to be able to do some natural language processing on our data, especially open-ended questions. I think there's some improvements there. Go ahead, Michael.
No, sorry, I've got a construction going on near me. I should mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were trying to say something. But yeah, there's a lot of challenges at the moment with open-ended responses, right? I think we're much more adept at processing, multiple choice type question data, and I think there's a lot of improvements to be made in that. And we have lots of tools here. We have tools here to do this.
Now I do have a question. So I guess I thought I understood what the idea was, and now I'm I'm getting a little confused. Is the idea to use open-ended questions to get suggestions from learners about how to improve the course, and then use the NLP to, or some other tools to parse that and categorize to improve your ability to sort through those suggestions? Or are you trying to develop open-ended question types that are used for assessment using these tools?
So because I'm doing this qualitatively, not quantitatively, I am trying to look for a lot of things at the same time. In guided discovery question, I'm trying to look, maybe they already know this concept, so it's not interesting for them. If their prior knowledge already covers some component skills that we are targeting, or if they have specific misconceptions or things that are interesting about this particular topic that we are not targeting, maybe we can include that in the course, and maybe we can eliminate the redundant part that they already know. For application ideas, we are looking for what is the gap between what they are learning in the OLI module and what they are trying to apply in the project. Like, yeah, and even in application idea, we are looking for misconception or something that they didn't notice that maybe we can emphasize more or correct it early. So I'm looking for a lot of different things. Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe then we
go ahead.
maybe then we can speak about what they're looking using NLP specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, we have multiple choice questions that have been generated by students in some of the chemistry courses, and so we have we are referring to a rubric for whether the multiple choice question generated is falls into like a category of questions that can be used further with, or can be incorporated within the course. So we are actually using the rubric to categorize whether those items are there within the question to make it a good multiple choice question or a bad multiple choice question, or like not bad, but like cannot be used. And then, or we can also provide feedback to students about improving the question further. Like things like, oh, whether it has good distractors, whether the language is consistent throughout, so on and so forth. I can also share the rubric with you in some time.
And how much is the goal here to find out how much students learn from crafting these questions? Or are you more focused on just speeding up the creation of good question banks, and are researching how effective students can do that? How effective?
So the primary goal is that whether it is impacting student learning, and Stephen can speak a little bit more to that about the research that's ongoing with how it's impacting student learning, how students are, how their performance in the post test is related to their performance in whether they're attempting the questions and what kind of questions they're attempting. But yeah, we are also like looking at whether some of these questions can be incorporated, or the inputs that we get from these learner sourcing question types can be incorporated within the courses. Yeah, and the MCQ one is just one type of course. So like there are a couple of other, one type of question. So there are a couple of other question types that are doing more of the qualitative that are asking students more qualitatively, what do you think about this question? Why do you think? Can you offer a hint in this place for other students who might struggle with this question, so on and so forth. So for that piece, I think we are still working on how to analyze that data.
Yeah, I mean, they're both interesting and very different research challenges, especially when you're thinking about applying AI and ML to them. You know, in one case, I think having the ability to provide automated feedback on question quality of any given type would be tremendously useful learning engineering tool. So to the degree that that work can be automated using various tools, that would be a great way to use crowdsourcing research to bootstrap into something that's generally useful. You know, the question of, can you ask open-ended questions that elicit better understanding of various student learning states, or you know, that what they are or are not getting from the course. That's really interesting. And I suspect it would require, you know, some extensive design of both the sort of co-design of the prompts and the algorithms to get that out. But again, it could be something that is a generally useful tool if these are things. So when I hear you talk about the amount of work that's involved, to me, what I keep hearing is, this is research, and if we could just figure out how to scale it, it's applicable across a whole bunch of domains, right? So just going back to what Norman was saying earlier, what we want to be thinking about is not only sort of the nuts and bolts of what you're getting at with your you know, which data fields you want and how you want to export them and so on, but also on the bigger picture, you know, what could we do from a workflow and automation perspective that would make enough difference in the amount of work that goes into each of these research types that you could see many more people doing the research if only we could get that grunt work out of it.
Yeah, I think I agree. That's what I was trying to communicate, but maybe I was not clear in the beginning, that we already have this Python script and models that we looked at previously for a specific course. And we find out that formative assessment were better predictor of external project. And we wrote a research paper and it got kind of closed at that point. But maybe we want to continuously look at it and try to improve things in quiz question, and just try to see how we can make course-wide improvements. So utilize these parts and not just abandon them as a one. Or maybe even if we don't abandon them, spend so much time again to do a thing that we already did.
Yeah, that sounds related to what Lauren was doing too. It sounds like there is this need to be able to collect this data kind of historically across courses, across sections, across time as well. And the more you can collect, the more types of insights you can generate from that. And so, I mean, Data Shop offers that ability, right? Like, are you using Data Shop at all, Gautam, through this?
Yeah. So I'm using Datasoft for the open-ended question, but yeah, it's still difficult for me, maybe because it's my first time doing it, for at least for the open-ended responses. And I came to this meeting to still kind of, I didn't think that I'll talk about it, but when I saw today's topic, bullet points, it just came in my mind.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is good discussion.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you're talking about open-ended responses, because what I'm hearing from a lot of course instructors is a need to work on critical thinking among their students. So critical thinking is something that's just really difficult to get your students to do when you're using multiple choice. So there's going to just be a greater and greater need for us to be able to process open-ended response data. It's just something that we're going to have to get better at doing, because we're going to have to ask our students harder critical thinking questions, especially as this seems to be a direction that I'm seeing a lot of course instructors talking about. So I think it would be a really good thing if the Torus platform could be supportive of that type of analysis, because that's just going to become a more and more dramatic need. And so just being able to process data easily that's in a multiple choice format won't be sufficient. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just let me just suggest a way of thinking about that sort of problem together. And I'm going to use it. I'm going to use an example of what I think we shouldn't be doing as a way of getting at what I think we should be doing.
Okay.
So Google's got this product out now where they're doing paraphrase analysis, right? They're looking to see, on the one hand, is the language original enough, different enough from the original that that it's not just copying, but on the other hand, are the same concepts there, right? Which is it's a great it doesn't get at the critical thinking, but it's a nice addition to the toolbox, right? A way of getting at, are you really understanding this? But privately, with talking to the people who are actually using the product, there's no research being conducted on of any seriousness on how effective it is, on whether it's more effective or less effective with second language learners or people with weak writing skills. Does it do more good than harm? We just don't know those things, right? So what I think is more interesting is to come at this from the opposite direction. What I think I heard you say, Gautam, was that you had an experimental, design approach that that you ended up, which I think happens frequently, you end up throwing it away because you've done the experiment, it was labor intensive, and then you move on to something else that's equally labor intensive. If that experimental design can be recruited, and optimized using tools like machine learning and AI, then we can use that experimental design all over the place, and it eventually sort of converges on learning engineering tools, or even proving out direct to student question development type tools. So I think if we want to get to the place that Google is rushing headlong towards, in the case, and I think it was you, Lauren, who said, you'd like to get to be able to do analysis of critical thinking in free-form text, then we should be thinking about the experiments that we would conduct and how we can recruit tools to make those experimental designs much more reusable to the point where they're routine.
I think that's a very interesting thought that I hadn't thought of before, is it's not just about being able to do these certain calculations or but if we really want to be able to replicate studies, then we kind of need the whole package of what folks are doing in terms of the steps they're doing and the analysis they're doing on for any given experiment, in a way that can be like kind of an experiment in a box.
Yes, and the final stage of an experiment in a box is it becomes a checker, right?
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask Lauren, though, based on what she was describing, that is, right now it's even there's even some more lower hanging fruit than that. And that is, and to Cottam's point too, there's no way right now to really review those open-ended responses in any one place. You have to export the data and then run some, you know, some scripts over it to even be able to extract the open-ended responses in one, you know, one place where you can review them. So that's a problem. And I was wondering how even something like that might look. What are the types of things you'd want to be able to see? Like, say you had a review tool right in Torus to say, okay, I want to review all open-ended responses. It wouldn't be all open-ended responses, right? It would be, I'm just kind of trying to think of ways that, like, what would be the first step, like to be able to look in and peek into the system and say, okay, how are the students responding to these in real time? You wouldn't want just a free form list of all open-ended responses. Would you want it? I'm trying to think of the different ways we might be able to segment that data or the views of that data in the system to begin with, which would also give us ideas about how to export it as well.
Well, isn't there, you know, pattern recognition of different answers, like for people that grade open-ended responses in GradeScope? So in GradeScope, individuals that answer something like roughly the same way, doesn't it basically grade them all at once? And then I don't use GradeScope, but because I work with instructors and I'm not teaching any courses where I would need to use GradeScope, but my understanding is that GradeScope is sophisticated in the way it can deal with open response questions and grade multiple responses simultaneously.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at. Like, yeah, that's more for grading, but I'm thinking for experimentation, what would that look differently?
Oh, I mean using the same sort of whatever algorithm they're using for pattern recognition for grading in GradeScope. If you say, you know, this collection of words is kind of like a right-ish answer, then you can see if students are on the right track.
Mm.
If you're going in and looking at that, you know, like say, okay, well, 50% of my students are approximately on the right track for this. You're looking at it as at a glance. Oh, it looks like there's something in the chat.
Yeah, so well, Kim has I want to know more about what you're saying. And then yes, Torus does have automatic grading with regular expressions now. It does do that. But I'm sure it could be more robust. We're just kind of starting out with that. Kim, what can you explain a little bit more about what you mean for like for an OER ID?
Oh, you were just talking about not being able to separate the OERs, and generally like assessment, there's some sort of ID. And so I was just saying that you would want to be able to sort by the ID for that particular open-ended response. I think there are lots of great things to do with OER data. I mean, I use it all the time to create selected response questions by identifying misconceptions. So I think there's so much fun stuff to do with OER, and then creating constructed response questions, which sounds like similar to what you're talking about with some auto grading with natural language processing, is also, there's a lot of experimentation around that can be really interesting.
Great.
Yeah, Kim, can you talk a little bit more about how you build up your like if you're what was the process by which you got to the ability to test test for misconceptions in your open-ended response? If that's if I'm understanding what you're talking about correctly.
Yeah, so in collecting all the data, right, we're going to look at so generally with OERs, you want to try to have some sort of expert answer. We call OERs kind of submit and compares in OLI because you know, we would give them a comparative expert answer. And so some of the things that, you know, you do with the natural language processing, right, is you know, kind of look at, well, of the points of comparison in this obviously gets harder and harder as the question becomes less itemized, shall we say, and more ambiguous. Like if you like a lot of the work they've done at Turnitin with grading essays and stuff, they've had to do a lot of modeling and really kind of be very deliberate about, even though a student may come back with an answer that isn't exactly that, there's a certain rubric and criteria that's being used. And so with open-ended response, what you want to do is you want to have that rubric, that criteria, to then be able to evaluate, if you're looking at evaluating student answers. And then based on that, you can look at the ones where they're not doing well, right? And this is a manual process that can be done to help a model, to train a model, that, and having, a decent amount of examples to run through to start training that model. But then look at what are some common misconceptions that come up in that data. And then you can use those as selective response questions that can help scaffold learners to be able to answer these or constructed response questions. I don't know if that answered your question, Michael, or if I just kind of rambled on.
No, that's exactly what I was looking for. So just again, backing into, we have some folks who are engaged in research projects that, are not necessarily designed for mass application in their conception. I mean, there may be a hope or a goal that eventually they could be useful, but you're doing some basic research, and maybe what you're trying to figure out is, how do we evaluate open-ended responses such that we can reliably, through well-constructed rubrics, get a good inter-rater response or something, some measure like that on identified misconceptions, right? And so then what often happens is someone goes out and they do that study. It's a ton of work, and then they move on, right? And what I hear you saying is, if we think about this as something that we really like to see in action, then all that research work can also be recruited to train a model that then makes this process something that can be put into production.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I live in the land of iteration. And so with experimentation, doing it once and, saying, yeah, this worked. It worked for these learners under these circumstances, right? So I think redoing experiments all the time is really important with different populations. I also think that, where was I going? The OER, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but yeah, I think doing experiments is important, but we iterate all the time. So we're constantly changing it. I know what I was going to say. The other thing too, though, is with OER. So you're talking about what's great about open-ended response or constructive response questions, and which is really hard about them in technology, right? Is that we want learners to generate their own answers, right? Because we know that helps us to infer whether or not they have a deeper understanding, right? And so in order to do that, that's a lot harder. But we also need to think about, because there's experiments have been done about OERs or constructive response, where learners who have generated their own answers actually kind of do not do as well overall sometimes as learners who are given selected response questions. And part of that can be too, is really having to think about your learner. Is your learner a novice or do they have more experience? Because generating your own answers for a novice is going to be a lot harder than it would be for somebody who has more prior knowledge. So there's also some strategy in when are you using that with your learners, and what is the prior knowledge of your learners?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to do, and I'm sorry, Aaron, if I'm hijacking your meeting.
Dude, there's no such thing. Go ahead.
Okay, they're just. It seems to me that there are folks who are doing really interesting sort of basic science may be too strong of an expression, but doing pure research that has interesting applications, but because they're focused on the pure research aspect of it, they end up doing a lot of manual labor and coming up with experimental designs that end up getting thrown out. And then on the other side of the divide, there are folks who are engaged on very practical, hands-on learning, iterative learning engineering, right? And what we don't have yet is a pipeline from one to the other, right? And so developing a tool set like we're doing with Upgrade, where they've thought through not only within class and between class A, B, excuse me, testing, but they're thinking about things like crossover designs, and they're real researchers that can articulate a number of experimental designs. If we layer on top of that a combination of an ability for a researcher who's doing professional design to recruit and educators who want to participate in that research and understand the design with sort of okay, you want to do a simple research design and you're not a researcher of this type, here's how you do it, right? That's one way that we can begin to build a pipeline, by democratizing some of the research elements. But the other way is to kind of work backwards and for us to start thinking, and I think this is the harder mind shift, is to start thinking about those elements of your experimental design that are labor intensive but valuable and reusable, potentially, if they were less labor intensive, and start asking whether we could implement tools that would lend themselves, that would make your experimental design more open to iterative reuse and recruitment for similar uses.
I think I understand what you're saying, because I am one of those researchers that's basically designs experiments that are implemented in university classrooms. So learning research where we're addressing things that have maybe been shown in a laboratory setting, and then we're testing them in a real world classroom. And we do the study in a particular classroom using that particular LMS. And it is very labor intensive, because often it involves a lot of manual work in some way. So I think I'm picking up what you're saying. And I also have a hard time imagining how to leverage that sort of classroom by classroom research pipeline into the larger OLI package. I understand the principle of like many classes and what many classes has achieved, but this is kind of an entirely different undertaking. So how do we conduct our research that we're doing in a university classroom at a larger scale, when we need to do things beyond also just look at multiple choice answers, which is why I was saying one of the ways to kind of at least forge some new ground is to really look into the ability to evaluate those open response questions, because where I see people moving is into the interest of critical thinking. So that's why I was saying it's important to move beyond simple retrieval and recognition, because what people are going to begin to be testing is something more than that. But I definitely appreciate your question, and I have a hard time envisioning how to meet that as well.
So this is where I started thinking with regard to what you said, Michael. We also need a way of maybe not only being able to replicate studies with this experiment in a box kind of idea, and having, here's my research method and maybe it can replicate, but even just someplace where, right where learning designers are, because again, I'm with Kim, I'm kind of always thinking about iterative improvement and how we can take the results of studies that have been conducted and say, oh, okay, this is the insight they got from that study. I think I want to try this in my next course design and see how it works out in, various ways. So even I think a step between being able for me to replicate the study would be, what are the insights that have been have been kind of produced out of these research studies that then I can kind of pick and choose, like, oh, that's an interesting thing that just came out of that study. Let me try that in my new design and iterate on this course in this way. I can imagine that being helpful too. So Kim, I'm glad you joined, because you are like me, like always thinking about iteration, and how we can ease that, kind of the way I was just describing, like how do you take new insights from things and use that information to say, I'm going to improve my course now. And it might not just be with the data from your particular course, it might be data from a different experiment altogether.
And we do that in a lot of our projects. There are multi-semester projects with people across different courses. So like flashcard project that's been going on at UNH for semesters. It's an iterative project where we ask different questions in different semesters based upon the previous semester's findings. And you have a lot of control in that situation because you're just working in one course and it's domain specific. So I really have no idea how you'd be able to scale that up to the OLI platform for an experiment in the box. But I like the question.
Well, it's right. So different sorts of experiments are going to be more or less scalable or scalable in different ways. So one way of scaling, your course design experiment would be, let's say you're doing something with, one of the more widely adopted courses like stats, right? To be able to recruit, multiple classes to run the same experiment. They don't necessarily even have to be running it separately. They could have multiple iterations, or they could just simply opt in to participate in your pool of subjects. This is something that we envision for the tool that we're building, integrating with Upgrade. So you could, assuming IRBs and all of that are worked out, you could reach out to any of the schools, any of the classes at any of the schools that are using the stats course, potentially through the interface, and make educators aware that, hey, we're doing this experiment, would you like to participate? And maybe you could even attach a survey that helps you identify whether they have the right characteristics for your experiment.
Yeah, that's super cool. I mean, that's the best way to, I think, to scale these, but to support that is what you're saying. You kind of need, sometimes they might want insight into what exactly is this experiment doing. So, oh wait, so
Yeah.
what you're saying is they're not taking what the research design and replicating it, they're opting in to be part of a larger research experiment.
That's right. So you'd inform
cool.
them, you inform them of what the experiment is, you'd inform them about what their students would be going through in some detail. They might answer some questions for you about the characteristics of their class so that you can know whether they're appropriate to include. And then those classes are simply put into the pool of potential subjects, and they go through the normal informed consent process. And you will have tags to know, which classes, which students are from which classes, if that kind of thing is useful for your analysis.
Interesting. But again, one of the hard parts of that, I think, is also, you mentioned it already, and I noted it here, IRB considerations. And I know that trips a lot of people up from being able to participate like this, like you're describing. So I wonder if there's also like an interim step where you're kind of suggesting this experiment in a box, but maybe I'm also trying to think of like lighter weight ways we can get to the same thing and maybe try out before we have the whole experiment in a box, which is maybe even just somewhere where people can go to say, here are the calculations I've run, or the analytics I've run on this particular course with this data that I'm collecting. I guess I'm trying, I'm not describing this very well, but I'm trying to imagine like an interim step where we can at least make folks aware of what types of things have been analyzed as part of an experiment, to allow folks to run their own analyses on their own data without and maybe providing results, because access to student data is really touchy through IRBs. And so we have to find some way, I think, sometimes to get around that.
Mhm. So, I mean, it sounds to me like you're describing some version of what Tigris does,
Yeah,
right? And I don't think it's
I guess.
crazy to think about that as a model to replicate within this structure. It's not something exactly as you described it that is, has been discussed for implementation, but I think it's a logical extension, and maybe not feature for feature, but
Yeah.
so I'm interested in the course design, I'm interested in the data, or I'm interested in both, and then depending on the conditions of the IRB, for that particular experiment, those may or may not be available.
Yeah, you're right. I am kind of describing Tigris, but like, I guess making it more clear, Tigris and LearnSphere right now are, built for researchers primarily.
Yeah.
If we can make that accessible, make the language around it and the tools around it a little more accessible for just everyday faculty to be, educators as experimenters.
Well, I think one of the things that Tigris takes on that this probably wouldn't be appropriate to put into OLI is the data analysis pipeline, right? So that, running, particular statistical analyses is an explicit part of your workflow canvas in Tigris. And while we probably want to give some access to researchers for some of that capability, maybe a lot of that in this system would be better handled offline. Maybe what this system is more focused on is making sure that the experimental setup, the design from the setting up the conditions and recruiting the student populations and so on, that part is handled well. And then you get the data that you need in a format that would allow you to run the analysis outside of the platform. That seems a lot more accessible to me, to a wider range of users in terms of their experience setting up these experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And you can put in simple analytics for very simple sorts of experiments.
Do you see a need to integrate more with Tigris? I know we're already building better integration with Data Shop, which also has a good integration with Tigris. But I wonder if there's more of a direct need there.
I mean, I would defer to Norman and the Simon team on that. I don't know what the usage and crossover is in the ecosystem in general.
Mhm.
I think the intention, across the partners is to keep as much compatibility with the Open Simon toolkit as possible. But I don't know where that would be, where Tigris specific integration would be on, a priority list or a.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right now, I mean, like I just described, there's no direct integration with Tigris or LearnSphere. But once you get your data into Data Shop, which we will have a direct export to, then you can pull in Data Shop data to run through the workflows in Tigris. And that might be enough. But I'm just thinking like what would or make it easy for through Torus for folks to submit their data for experimentation. Again, I'm always thinking of this from the standpoint of an instructor and the educators, because I think a lot of researchers know how to move this data around and get it in the right places for the right things, but I don't know that I'm trying to think of like buffers between that and the educators who might want the results, but don't necessarily have the time and the labor to do all of that data movement and segmentation analysis.
I think a lot from the instructor's perspective too, because I work with instructors and see what the choke points are. And I can tell you that we're running into a little bit of a challenge where students are not really reading as closely as they used to be, like reading instructions. And so because the student cognition toolbox is accessed outside of Canvas, our LMS, and it requires that students go in and complete it, even though we provide tons of instructions, our students are still confused about why credit isn't automatically generated in Canvas. And I know that this is something that's going to be available with Torus, where it's integrated into the LMS. But I also know from my instructors working through them that they do not want their gradebook automatically populated with every checkpoint quiz that's in our product. So it made me sort of it brings to the forefront of my mind how to even be able to collect data in a partnership with instructors. We need to be thinking about, there needs to be completion-based crediting that can appear in the LMS. And one of our instructors even said, if we can't have completion-based crediting appear automatically in the LMS, he's not going to use it anymore. So we have to be practical sometimes and think about the considerations that we can't even collect our data if it starts to be difficult for students to see credit, because students are part of LMSs that automatically populate. So I know that's something that we've talked about before, completion-based crediting and integration with Torus. It's just been at the forefront of my mind lately because it's going to be an obstacle for us even being able to collect data without it.
Yeah, so yeah, that complicates things when you have to work with educators and kind of help them find the motivations for students to even complete the things in the courses that are part of experiments.
Oh, and Kim asked me a follow-up question. Great, thanks for asking that, Kim. The reason that the instructors only want completion-based data is because what we're having students complete is basically a study skills module. So we built out this great study skills module, and this isn't domain specific, right? So the instructor's perspective is, I want my students to complete this, and if they complete this, they get credit. But the instructors don't want the students to be graded on how they have done. They simply want their students to complete it. So if you ever have, I bring this up because if you ever have like a course and you want to recruit people in to basically be part of your research group, it could be that the instructor's interests are not that they want the data, but they're like, oh yeah, I think this will be valuable for my students to do. Or this, you've developed a case study and they're willing to give it to their students. But what they want to see in their grade book is just, did the students complete it, not anything else. I hope.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because so there are two things. One, I'm teaching a course right now at design and co-teaching it. And one of the things is, and this is common at CMU, maybe when you're talking about the Collab U course is used in tons of courses, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not specifically domain specific, right? The Collab U course. But those skills, that knowledge and skills that we need our students to have while they're taking the course to do group projects and all the stuff that they have to do are part of the goals and outcomes. And I'm always a little hesitant when we have stuff in that isn't really part of the goals and outcomes of a course at some level. So while we're looking for them to complete it, we also need to see them apply those skills in their other projects. And I think sometimes we get into this idea of potentially, sorry, I'm a cat doing something crazy, to doing things where we kind of isolate, content, knowledge, and skills. And I think we need to kind of try not to do that. So even your experiments that you're integrating, they should integrate in a way that is also helping learners reach the goals of the course, right? So, and I run into completion also on the other side of this, working in workforce training, that has really been the bread and butter for workforce training. Did they complete it? And, what we really want to know is, well, did they learn anything so that they can apply those skills on the job, right? So I'm always a little like, when someone says completion, what's really going on there? So, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting things that we're getting a little bit away from the research again, but there are some interesting things that you can do in Torus. Excuse me. And there are all kinds of reasons why you wouldn't. I mean, completion is just a, it's just a checkpoint, a milestone, right? There, you could consider on a more granular level certain formative assessments that you don't want to flow to the grade book. You don't want to see them, right? So within Torus, you get to decide, and I'm sure there's a lot of UX that we need to continue to build out, but you fundamentally, the architecture lets you decide what flows to the grade book. And if you have a separate kind of probe that you're interested in, that maybe your individual faculty member is not interested in, like what skill or competency is this tied to, and did they, even the definition of completion, you can within the system for both research and for course evaluation purposes, and you can say, well, I'm going to define completion as having achieved a certain percentage of these questions, right? You can, right, going back to the learning curves, right? How confident am I this person has achieved competency? Again, I think that's a piece that's probably not fully built out yet, but that should be, a completion trigger that exists in the system for research, grading purposes, or both.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. So what we would want is, I understand that it could be different depending on the particular course. So we would say, like, if you've completed at least 6 of the 8 checkpoints, we know that you have completed enough. So it's not necessarily for us going to be based upon correct. It's going to be based upon completion of different items, but that will help a lot.
Yeah, I think that, so there are lots of pieces that we're talking about that we're sort of glossing over the details, and there may be things that if Darren were here, he would smack me upside the head for saying, well, that's really only 60% done. But excuse me, all of these items are important to register for design goals, as Aaron's doing, and I haven't heard anything that I believe is not at least planned for in the foundations of Torus.
Yeah, great, Michael. That's probably exactly how I would have ended this discussion. So thanks. Yeah, so we're about at time with 1 minute left. But I believe this has been a really nice discussion. We've captured a lot of notes and kind of a wish list. But to Michael's point, I think, yes, we are trying to build things into Torus to ease a lot of these choke points in research and for educators alike. So yeah, so that leads us to my last slide, which is next meeting is November 4th, and we plan to do a Torus demonstration in that meeting. So if you're interested in seeing some of these things that have already been built out, come to that meeting and see, or at least review the recording that gets done after the fact. But I do hope to see you all there. And thank you all for coming and for participating as usual. And see you next time. Have a nice weekend.
Pete, thanks a lot. Sorry to drop in halfway through.
No, it was
In a meeting.
perfect. Thanks, Kim, for coming at any time.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Erin, can you just tell me what time I'm supposed to do the meeting thing on the 16th of November?
Yes, I can send you an email to let you know. I
Perfect.
was actually just thinking of you yesterday and thinking we need to meet up, but this is fine too. It's always at noon, and I'll send you.
Oh, okay. I had no idea. So that's great because I've blocked off my whole day and I was like, it's gonna start needing to get filled up with other meetings.
Yeah,
So
it's only an hour, and in your part would only be like a half hour at most. So
noon to noon 30-ish.
yeah. Oh, no, it'd be 12:30 to 1.
12:30 to 1. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and I'll follow up with an email.
Okay, perfect. Bye, Erin.
Thank you. Bye, Lauren.